But it was beautiful because I remember listening to you speak at this event, and you just sounded so sure of like being unsure of your path. And like, to me, that's like huge, because I think a lot of us have this in us where stability is amazing, and knowing how much money is coming in our account each week is amazing, and being successful, like, what is that to you? And when I really, really dug deep to find what does success mean, it's not the house, it's not the kids, it's not the car, it's not the money, and it's not the degree, because I had a lot of those things. It was feeling purpose, and I didn't have that at my career.
I'm Megan Armstrong. Welcome to Life 6 Feet Above. 6 Feet Above was created when I started to share my story of spending 16 years wanting to be 6 feet under, to now living a life full and happy 6 feet above. The more that I started to talk about my journey, my struggles, and my past, the more I realized people were genuinely interested and not judgmental at all, which is what I'd feared for so long. In fact, other people wanted to talk about their story as well, and for some reason they trusted me to do so. So the 6 Feet Above podcast is my way of helping to share other people's stories, finding out what works for them to create a life of happiness. Before we start this episode, I want to let you know it has some explicit language and some very serious subject matter. It may be triggering or sensitive to certain people. Please listen with discretion. This is Heather's story. Welcome back to the 6 Feet Above podcast, episode 26. I am joined by a friend named Heather Rep, and you might have heard of her because Wellness for Humanity has blown up in Atlanta, in Dallas, in New York, and on the West Coast. So welcome, Heather.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to interview you, and I'm pivoting a little bit this year. So the first two seasons were very mental health based, and not to say that this episode is not mental health based, because everything really is. But my draw to interviewing you is that you made a huge impact on society, at least here locally in Atlanta, with your COVID testing in 2020. And I'm excited to hear how you got there and how you made a year that was so traumatic for so many people a success for you and your family. And I know it wasn't easy, and I know that there's a big backstory to it, but instead of, this person went through depression or anxiety or whatever, I wanted to bring you on because you're such an inspirational force in the community, and people need to hear about these stories. So welcome.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes. Are you nervous?
Yeah, a little bit.
This is your first podcast?
Yeah. Well, and you're, honestly, I love that we've met a few years ago and run into each other in different circles. And it's funny, you calling me an inspiration because I look at you that way, and just the way you've overcome everything. So it's truly an honor to be here today and talking to you.
I appreciate that. I think the last time we saw each other in public, we were having a Christmas cocktail.
Yes.
What is it
The
called?
Blinded Elf.
The blinded
Blinded
Pig, right? Or the blind pig?
I think they call it Elf during Christmas.
Oh, okay.
Season,
I
can't remember.
That's so true.
It is such a speakeasy, though. I love that place.
I love that place. I'm like, don't tell anyone about it, because got to keep it secret.
Yeah. Well,
so welcome. Give us a little bit of a background about Wellness for Humanity and your role there.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. So wellness was started out of passion. The big goal in April was to empower humanity to thrive again.
Okay.
And so I got involved around August of 2020. I had already been a physician assistant for many years, practicing anesthesia. And so I had dealt with COVID firsthand when it came on. I saw really the tragedy side of it. I was working in a COVID ICU and intubating patients who were not doing well. And this is back in March and April when we really knew nothing about the disease.
Right.
And it was frightening, to say the least. So I have two little kids, and I remember coming home in the morning because I had to work night shift because nobody wanted to watch my kids during the day.
Aw.
And just changing in the garage, scrubbing my body off, and thinking to myself, there has to be something better.
Right, right,
Instead of kind of holding my breath, praying for this to be over, how can I help stop the bleed?
right.
And so this company, Wellness, had kind of started doing things like antibody testing. And this is really before we knew how to even test people, right?
Right. So
Like,
we're talking about a year ago, like literally.
Yep.
I mean, we're recording, but you're actually going to be, your release date, I think, is going to be March 23rd, which is almost exactly a year from our shutdown.
Yeah.
So we're talking, and it's hard to I feel like last March was way more than a year ago. Does it feel like that way? I feel like it was,
it definitely feels like
but
the longest
also
year.
yeah, it feels like it was like several years ago, but also like yesterday at the same time.
Yeah.
So this is back at a time when we really didn't know anything. And everyone was so up in the air and so scared. And people are still, scared, rightfully so. But at least we know more now. So put us back in that place for you.
Yeah, it was crazy because I just remember watching the news, and it was when every single day you would just turn the TV on and you would watch the New York numbers and Italy, and you would get updates from China, and they were talking about a nationwide shutdown, and our hospital had stopped outpatient surgery, so they had really not much to do with the staff. They were like, well, we don't really have a job for you because we can't safely perform outpatient procedures, not to mention who wanted to go get something elective at the time, right? So they took volunteers to either work during the day to do emergent procedures, or some of us who were younger and healthier, we opted to go in and do this COVID ICU night shift or during the day.
Okay.
Like I said, I opted for the night shift because I just didn't have any help for my two littles.
Yeah.
But the hard part was sourcing any kind of mask. I was reusing the same mask for 2-3 weeks. I had to order goggles on Amazon, and I'm competing against the entire world trying to get some goggles, but I really
hospitals
needed
aren't
them.
doing it for you because they just don't have the capacity, or what? I've actually never asked. I haven't had anyone ask a professional, but what was the whole thing? Were the hospitals not prepared, or how were you able to get your own materials and they weren't?
Yeah, I would love to answer that question. I think they were already in a shortage supply, is my understanding, prior to the pandemic.
Okay.
And then they never caught up.
Got it.
And so when the pandemic hit, I think some people were maybe taking them from the hospital because they were so scared.
Got it.
And then we were just going through them so quickly. And then all of a sudden their new regulations came out. It was kind of like... when you would get a staff letter, it was today, this is the new update. And it would be something different every single day. Reuse the same mask. Don't reuse the same mask. We don't have any masks, so you better bring your own.
Oh, my gosh.
So I actually used it was a painter's mask.
Uh-huh. Yes, I saw a lot of people doing that.
It was kind of crazy. N95s, which some people might not know this, but you're actually supposed to be fit tested for them.
Oh.
So prior to the pandemic, we only used N95s for airborne diseases, so tuberculosis. So
Got it.
anytime I would have a TB patient, we would have to wear this mask. So I got fitted for one, when I first started working.
Right.
And they were like, these don't fit you.
Oh, jeez.
I failed the fit test, which actually is fairly common. I guess it's my facial structure. But guys are supposed to shave their beards because you technically can't have any kind of opening.
Oh.
And so this is when we think the whole thing's airborne,
Right.
walk 18 feet away from everyone.
Right.
It lives everywhere. And I'm great, I have to go in and wear a mask that doesn't fit. Amazing.
Yeah. And terrified that this is going to happen to me, and you're taking care of people that are literally on their deathbeds, right?
Yeah, the best part was honestly how many of my neighbors and friends reached out and said, you know what, I've got a mask in my basement that I painted with. I would love to drop it off. Or I would randomly get a Starbucks gift card. And honestly, just for every bad person, when I would go to Costco and see somebody wearing an N95 when they didn't need to, there was a good person that was honestly, sharing what they had. And that was amazing.
Yeah.
So I worked that. Luckily, it wasn't long before elective surgery picked back up.
Okay.
And then in June, I stopped doing anesthesia altogether and kind of had the rug pulled under me. And that was the best thing that could have happened.
In hindsight,
In
right?
hindsight,
2020.
yeah.
So previous to working overnights and, helping out with COVID, you were doing what?
So yeah, on the side, I had been starting a healthcare software.
Okay.
It was going to be a full startup. We were a skeleton crew. I had one other co-founder and a developer and then an investor, and we were really working to change medicine in a new way.
Okay.
So this is prior to the pandemic, and it was super exciting, and we were really taking off. And in February, had won a Healthcare Innovation Award here in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided to put in kind of like a 90-day notice pre-pandemic in February of 2020.
Right.
That went into effect June 1st. So when June 1st came around and they didn't really need me in the ICU and outpatient surgery was still really slow, I was left without any safety net, 2 kids and a mortgage.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
kind of crazy.
So what was the next step after that?
Just keeping my
Praying.
heart open. Yeah. I think the biggest thing is when you're left in that situation, being open to whatever falls in your lap and knowing in your heart that you will make it work because you have no other choice.
Yeah.
So rather than sitting at home and, obviously like unemployment is super important for people, but rather than just using that until it picked back up, I said, okay, like what are my skills and how can I use these? And it was a blessing, but a friend of mine, which is why I think networking is so important, reached out to me and said, hey, I know you're kind of between things. Do you want to help with, this wellness center I'm about to start? And I was like, I don't know what it is, but I'm all in.
Right.
And I want equity and I want to make it work. And I don't want just a position because that's what I was trying to get out of the first time.
Yes. Okay. So this guy comes along and you've never heard about this company. Where is it based out of?
We're actually based out of Houston.
Okay. So Texas based. And what does he explain when you're like, well, what do you even do? How does he, what's his elevator pitch?
I love it. He was honestly like, so I owned a gym before and we're kind of shut down and I don't really know what else to do, but I think that this would be a great opportunity to help people get back to work and fun again. And the difference in wellness and other testing centers is we're promoting, for the population that is not high risk, that needs to get tested regularly, we want to make it easy, convenient, and fast for you.
Okay.
We also want to educate you because we know that there's so much misinformation or that information is changing constantly.
Right.
I don't know one person that came out in March and April that was completely correct. I mean, even me and things that I thought and, it's constantly changing.
Sure.
So that's what's nice about our site is we don't just take one piece of information and run with it.
And go with it, yeah.
Consistently are kind of changing it.
Yeah.
So I think I was really open to it. I mean, if he had said that, I don't know, when I wasn't as vulnerable, I don't know if I would have taken him up on it.
Yeah.
But I trusted who he was and his network. And
Right.
I was, and myself, I really was like, you know what? I'm going to make this work. I have a family to provide for. And I really think even if COVID only lasted 2 more months, I mean, in August, I had no idea.
Right.
Maybe it was only through September. The numbers were down.
Here we are in March of 2021. Well, it's funny you say that because about the June and how it's, the wellness is supposed to be, fast and effective for people. Because I remember June was the first test I got. And I needed it very quickly because I have a job that if I can't go and work with people, I'm not going to get paid. And I didn't have an option for unemployment. There's so many things that happened last year that were very unfair, but whatever, it is what it is. But I remember going to a quote unquote rapid test and having to sit in my car for 6 hours to get tested. So this place comes along in June, but you guys didn't open right away.
No.
It took a little while.
It took a little while. So there's a lot of nobody wants to open a COVID site.
Right.
I hate to tell landlords, it's not their favorite.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of hoops to jump through and convincing that, we're not just testing, sicker, symptomatic people. It's more like people like you who just need to get back to work. There is this other subset of the population that needs kind of testing to be compliant with any measures that are put in place by their place of work or by their school or whatever it is. And so people like really hadn't thought of that concept. So they were like, no, of course we need drive-through testing. And I'm like, but that makes sense for people that don't feel well,
Yes.
not necessarily someone who wants to get in and out and get on with their day because they actually do feel okay.
Right. Well, and this was like when everyone was, if you were like, there were so many trigger words last year, but one of the ones that stands out for me is exposed. Like we are all exposed. You walk out of your door and you're exposed. Okay.
Right.
So, but it was when the world started opening back up. If a friend got it, you're like, oh my God, I was near them. I was exposed to it. So just that sort, I'm like, I feel fine. I don't have a temperature, all these things. I felt totally fine, but I felt like it was my responsibility to get tested. So I feel like we're still using that word exposed. And
I know.
My parents are in New York and it's a very different vibe in New York State, but I'm glad that they're finally kind of opening up to this possibility because didn't you just open a center in New York City?
Yeah. Yep. We have a vending machine there right now. And then by the time we probably, this podcast airs, we'll be open.
Really?
So,
Okay.
We like to make our sites look a little more, I hate using the word bougie, but it's true. Like we want them to feel clean, inviting, more like a wellness center.
Yeah.
So
Less
of course,
sterile, quote unquote. Like if you're not walking
Exactly.
into a hospital.
and we don't want people to feel turned off by it. Like
Yeah.
when they come in, like, does it feel like a DMV or does it feel like, somewhere super nice and where people like really put in thought and effort into like what's going on. So we have had some construction going on, and New York State is like the best with permitting. So that's why we're a little behind.
At least we're good at something.
Yes. But we still are open for concierge testing right now.
Okay.
So that's actually our big market is corporate and event testing and then coming to you, because we know, especially in New York City, I mean, it's hard to get around, and like, who wants to take public transportation right now?
Right.
So if they can walk there, of course, like we'll take them in, but our sites are really kind of flagship stores to offer what we can do for your company, your business, your school. And we've got some really cool things coming up, and I'm like super excited because not a lot of companies are doing that.
That's
So
awesome. Good.
I'm really excited.
So you get hired in June, and then did you obviously had to go through some sort of training process, or did you go out to Houston for, to kind of immerse yourself? Was that the first place that opened?
Yeah, they were doing like, I love this story because actually in April, my CEO was, doing antibody testing like in a Q-tip suit. Like if you can envision a big papper suit like out of her car, and she was like willing to volunteer as tribute. I mean,
really?
She is, female, willing to do anything, minority, and she is a boss. I mean, I love it because...
Thank you for not saying girl boss, because we're all just bosses.
We're bosses.
Doesn't matter, male, female. Yeah.
And she is was willing to just put herself out there to like learn like how these antibody tests work at the time, and this is when a lot of people thought they had already had it. So that's why that was what was important, and that's really all we could source from China. We couldn't there was no rapid test. I mean, there was only PCR testing, and even labs. I love walking into labs now because you can tell they've gotten some money recently. Because prior to the pandemic, I mean, they were like swabbing petri dishes, which is like what they did in the 1800s.
Really?
I mean, that's how they were doing biology up until the pandemic, basically. Like, and so COVID's really put microbiology on the map as far as like, making it more innovative and gathering saliva samples. And now they're looking into like doing STD testing and all kinds of things, gathering just like saliva. And so that's like our big, right? Like, wouldn't it be cool if you could know what's going on in your gut from like spitting into a cup?
Yeah.
So,
I would much rather spit into a cup than have that thing shoved on my nose.
Yeah.
Though. Like, is that going to go away?
Yeah, we actually do saliva collection.
Okay, there we go.
So unless people want it.
Right.
Like,
no, I don't want that anymore.
I know. They still, they think it's not a real collection sometimes. But I always tell people it's not the method of collection that matters. It's what we're testing.
Got it.
So when you do saliva, nasal, or oral, meaning like a throat swab that feels like a strep test, that's all still going to a high quality lab where they have to process the results like on multiple machines.
Okay.
And so that's why sometimes, back in the pandemic, it could take 2 weeks.
Right.
Because the lab would be backed up. And then if you do a rapid test, it tests the protein. And so that's a different test. That's why they can do it in 15 minutes.
Okay.
So that's kind of like, some people prefer PCR because they're like, well, it's more accurate, but it always leaves our hands, which I don't love, because then it's like up to the lab. And, there is someone behind a lab coat also doing it, and it's not all automated. Whereas the rapid test like really never leaves our site.
Okay.
So that's
more
kind of
room
like,
for error.
Yeah.
On that. Okay.
It's kind of like they both have their positives and negatives.
Right.
So when we come up with a game plan for a corporate account, we kind of say like, a lot of times we'll do a PCR test 3 days before an event, before they fly, to make sure like, hey, we're not putting someone on a plane that's positive. And then once they arrive, we'll do a rapid test.
Okay.
And so that's how we do a lot of like in-person events with no masks or masks if they want them. And then we'll rapid test, just depending on the safety protocols they'd like to put in place.
I think this is a really good thing to talk about right now, because I think there's still and granted, people aren't abiding by certain laws and regulations, sure, but I think there are events going on, and people that are at these events are getting judged so quickly, but little do they know there might be a company like you who has made sure that they can attend these events and everyone's doing it safely. So I think people are so freaking quick to judge, and I know everyone is still angry about so many different things right now, but I think it's great to know that these things are happening and we may not be aware about these corporate events or these parties, because you were just at the Super Bowl, right?
It's crazy.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I have two different sides of that story. How do you test 6,000 people on site?
Sure.
Crazy, right? So we've partnered with a company that does it looks like a metal detector.
Yes.
You walk through it and it scans your core body temperature, your pupils for redness. And so it kind of uses AI to interpret if you have COVID symptoms.
Okay.
And then, so what we did is we put on-site rapid testing. So if the machine picked up that you were high risk, we then rapid tested you.
Okay.
And it was crazy. We pulled 5 or 6 positives out of these people.
Really?
It's obviously not as perfect as testing 6,000 people,
Sure,
but these
sure.
people would have gone there anyways.
Right.
You have to think their
Right.
risk was, hey, I'm going to go party anyways. But
Right.
if we can even slow the spread a little bit by those 6 people that were positive that we pulled, I mean, that's amazing to me. But I did just help a friend who's getting married, and it was an engagement party.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tested outside, and it was my gift to her. I was like, hey, I know you're very worried. And
Yeah.
so she had older people, pregnant people, I mean, kind of all over the map. And she really just was COVID had stopped her wedding last year. So she's I really want to just have a party.
Yeah.
So I was well, let me help. And so we tested everybody ahead of time at the door. And sometimes when I do these events, I know that no one's going to be positive, right? Why would you come if you're exposed or not feeling well?
You have a temperature. Okay.
Yeah.
You're not going to gone are the days where you go out with a fever anymore.
Exactly.
Right.
Or my throat's scratchy, I'm still going to
Right,
go to
right.
a party with 70-year-olds. Not smart. So when I'm testing one of the bridesmaids, I look over and I see a positive, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she was one of the girls that would have been bopping around to everybody.
Right.
And so I kind of pulled her aside, and I was like, hey, let's take a test again. Are you feeling well? She's like, girl, I just took a PCR test on Wednesday. I mean, it's Saturday. She's a local place. And she's like, it was negative. And I'm like, I totally trust you, but
Yeah.
I can't let you in.
Right.
So test her again, pop positive again. And I was like,
no.
I was feeling terrible because I was like, what if it's one of the false positives? Because they're very rare, but they do happen.
Sure.
So I sent her home. It was her birthday.
Oh,
And
no.
she had gotten all dressed up, and she felt really bad. And so she left, and everybody at the party was like, thank you for saving us, but hopefully it wasn't a false positive.
Yeah.
That friend called me 24 hours later, chills, fever, in bed, couldn't move. And I collected a PCR at the same time. Her PCR came back positive. And she's like, I've never felt worse in my life.
Oh, God.
And she was on her butt for a full week. And she's like, I cannot believe it. She's like, it must have been that perfect storm of between her other tests.
Mm-hmm.
And from when I tested her, maybe they didn't get a good sample. Sometimes with the nasal swabs, actually, people don't get a great sample.
Yep.
Because they don't go up high enough. So that's why we really do like the saliva collection much better.
Wow.
And so I don't know if where she went to get a nasal swab, they just didn't get a good collection, because it should have showed.
PCR.
Usually PCR shows up before antigen.
Yeah.
So that should have showed up. And it's crazy because the mom just of the bride was
Right.
like, Oh my gosh, I'm so glad we did this.
Right.
I mean, there were probably like 40 people there.
Well, and also like there's this sense of responsibility, us as, women or no matter who you are in your 30s, right? You don't want to be the person that gives it to a 70-year-old
Yeah.
or anyone for that matter. And like in that moment, you're mad. I'm sure she was pissed that she couldn't come in, but I'm sure when she called you 24 hours later, she's like, thank God you saved me, because that just has to be the worst feeling in the world, where you wake up and you were at some place the night before and then you wake up and you don't feel well and you're like, holy shit, I have to tell everyone I was just near that I don't feel well.
I mean, we have people like, especially in December, coming in,
Yeah.
and it was like post Thanksgiving, and they would get the phone call from their friend or their Thanksgiving they were at, and it was like the worst feeling, and they would get upset and
Right.
like, oh
Of
my
course.
gosh, I can't believe I'm positive. And I would say like, look, like you didn't start this. It's
Right.
not your fault.
Right.
And so I tell people all the time, even if she had gone into the party, it wouldn't have been her fault. Like, she really was responsible, got a test on Wednesday. But that's why our goal with wellness is actually to get testing readily available to whoever wants it. We're really working hard to get the pricing down so that you can self-administer tests as often as you want.
Yeah.
Because really just knowing your own immunity helps you, like, stop the spread, which is the entire point.
Right.
Like, I've accepted my risk of if I get it,
Sure.
I'm okay. I just don't want to give it to somebody else.
So you have the centers where people come to you. There's one in Atlanta. It's on Peachtree, right? Near the Peachtree and Piedmont.
Yep, right in the Disco Kroger Shopping Center, right next to Marshalls.
Okay. So you have one there, but then you also have the ability to fly and take your testing with you anywhere in the U.S. Or who are you catering to?
Yeah, we do at-home mail kits. So
Okay.
we can mail kits to anywhere in the U.S. So that's kind of how we have our nationwide reach.
Are people ordering those just to kind of have them?
Sometimes for travel. So
Yeah.
if you travel internationally, you have to have usually a negative PCR test 72 hours before you leave the
And
country.
they will accept these tests that you have?
Yep.
So you can order it at home, you do the test, and then you send it back to you?
We send it directly to the lab.
You send it to the lab.
just
and
to
then,
avoid shipping. Yep.
Okay, and then they get the results within 72 hours?
They usually get it overnight ships.
Okay.
And then Fridays are the only day that are kind of funky, but because of FedEx.
Right.
But every other day, like as long as the lab receives it the next morning, the results are 24 hours later.
Wow.
So it's kind of a cool way, and it's saliva collection, so people love that. Like, I've heard of companies that do mail home kits that are nasal. If they don't get a great sample, they can't run it, and then you can't go on your trip. And so that's always a bummer because you don't find out till like right before you leave.
Right.
So we have the mail home kits, and then we also can deploy staff. So I've done like events in other states where like I've sent, like for instance in Tampa, where I had, people on site, and we can test if it's a big group. So anywhere from like I've done 20 people at a hotel to like, 6,000.
Yeah.
And then we also, in Atlanta, we have a lot of corporate accounts. So we do testing for actually the Hawks. So we do
wow.
like their executive staff and then fans that come in.
Really?
And then we are a partner with IHG Hotels. So we've done testing for like the Intercontinental. And so, yeah, there's like a few other companies in Atlanta. We go on site to them like 3 times a week. And it's just a lot of fun, like, because then they get to do what they're supposed to do.
Right.
Whether it's like film crews, those
Sure.
are really up our alley because they have to be around each other without masks on.
Yeah.
And so we try and get them, those 24-hour results on a PCR because they really prefer that over the rapid usually. And we'll take it directly to the lab for them, and we just like provide that kind of like white glovey service.
Sure.
We try not to show up like all in like scary gear because we
Right,
know
right.
like the protection is for us.
Yeah.
And all our staff is like well tested or vaccinated, and so we try and ensure like and educated on COVID because we do have this brick and mortar site.
Right.
We see COVID in action a lot.
Right. So it's cool to hear that companies are investing in this. Maybe this is a dumb question, but is the government investing in this at all?
So
Or are
we don't
these
take
private
any
companies?
government
Okay.
cash. Yeah.
Okay.
We help people reimburse
Okay.
back to their insurance company, and we're rolling out a program that will like automatically do it for you. But
Okay.
right now, basically what we do is collect cash up front, and then we give you insurance codes and help you submit that
Got
with like
it.
an itemized receipt.
Got it.
And 87% of people get fully reimbursed. It's just, I always hate it for like the 13%.
Sure.
And then of course with them, we offer discounts and
Right.
codes like like, because, we don't want them to pay for it.
Right.
But the way we source it is not through government money.
Okay.
So
but the
that's
corporate
why.
companies, like big companies, are providing this for
Yes.
their employees.
Yep.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool.
They're actually not supposed to, corporate companies, and I hope this is still true, but they're not supposed to actually require you to use your own insurance to go get a COVID test. So you can opt that option, but they're actually supposed to pay for it out of pocket for you, just because it can change like your deductible and things like that.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. Have you remained healthy this whole year?
Oh my gosh, it's kind of crazy because I have not. I never got COVID.
Knock on wood.
And
you've already got the
ICU,
vaccine, I'm assuming, right? Yeah.
So in the ICU, I came down with pneumonia for like 2 weeks, and I was like, I'm sure this is COVID, right? Like, I could not. I'm fairly active, and I could not push a stroller across the street, and I was like, what is going on? And I tested for antibodies. I tested for COVID like 4 times. It was all negative. And then working at the site, we're around. Sometimes, like, especially when our numbers were high, like in December, we were around like a good amount of COVID positive patients. And I talked to them with a mask on. They have their mask on and really never caught it. I tell people the magic numbers are 15 minutes in a room, a closed room, without your mask on.
Okay.
If you talk to somebody briefly, you hug them, even like, like a close hug,
right?
But it's very brief. That's usually fine. That's not like a true exposure.
Okay.
But we see a lot of people get it from like, oh, I went out to the golf course and played golf with them, but like we rode in the car together.
Right.
Like, that's where you got it.
You're
in
like,
the car,
there you
not
go.
playing golf.
There you go.
Dinner parties are big. Because you're like in a close quarters and you're talking and you're kind of spitting across the table per se, sharing drinks, bottles of wine, things like that.
Sure.
But usually like grocery store runs, things like that. It is hard to get it that way.
Wow. So I actually I'm interested about this machine that you used in Tampa. Is this going to be kind of like a new thing that kind of detects your body overall when you walk through, like these scans that, the technology is so incredible that we have now, but I'm wondering if this is going to kind of be a new wave of the future. Because I remember seeing on your Instagram stories, and I'm like, what are those things? And it would be green or red.
Yep.
So is that kind of like the next big thing in technology for wellness and not even COVID, but just in general?
Yeah. Our goal and our parent company before we kind of pivoted in March was to really get people's bodies to their peak performance. So we were called Peak Space Labs because we wanted people to be at their highest level of like what their being is.
Okay.
So, gut testing for superfoods,
sure,
or brain foods, or like red light therapy because it makes me feel good, shared workspaces, things like this that make people like just innovative, sleep well, eat well, and so that way you're at your best capacity. And so when we partner with these technology companies, that's our big goal, is always to like kind of move towards like what makes something safer or better, or you enjoy this environment more. So when we found Safeway Entry Station, they actually were developing this technology to test for drug screenings. So it was for police officers who wanted to be able to test if people were like under the influence.
Really?
Yes.
Just walk through a machine
kind of crazy.
It's also terrifying. You're
I
like,
know,
can't get away with anything
crazy.
anymore.
I know. I'm like, is this a good idea? And for the Tampa event, I was like, that's fully off, right? Because there's going to be a lot of red lights.
Right. You're like, I had one too many drinks last night. That's going to go off.
Like everybody coming in the Super Bowl
party.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
And so they kind of pivoted, and then it's been interesting. We're just trying to collect data right now because it's actually in Canada and it's in a few like COVID hospitals, but those patients are typically much more symptomatic than asymptomatic people. So we've used these for certain events where like I'm trying to just basically get the AI to like get up there so that I can learn. And like that's the big goal of like pairing it with testing. I would never say it's like a great like just use this unless you're not going to use anything.
Right. It's a good compliment.
It's always like 10 minutes of working out is great, but like an hour's better.
Sure.
So that's kind of like our methodology with that. And then pinpoint temperatures are kind of terrible, right? Like my temperature could be low right now, but like I had night sweats last night, right? So we partnered with another company called BioStrap, and it's more for corporate accounts going back to work, where you can wear like a piece of like a wristband that kind of tracks your temperature all day and through the night, and you don't have to charge it like an Apple Watch. So you can actually wear it when you're most likely to like have those night sweats. That would be an indicative sign of like COVID or flu or anything that like spikes your body temperature, that makes you contagious, because like being febrile actually increases your contagion level. So that's like super important for no matter what you're carrying.
No matter what you have, right?
Yeah. Right. So this would be cool for like corporate companies to give to their employees to say, hey, like wear this during the day. What kind of like, if you're not feeling well, let's look at what your temperature trends were like the last few days.
Right.
And so we love pairing with like companies like that.
What a cool opportunity. I mean, I know like obviously if we had to go back, no one would ever wish that COVID would have happened. But there are always two options in life. And it just sounds like you and this company, I mean, you've really taken something that is tragic and very detrimental to society, and we're trying to do that the best that you can so that we can get back to functioning, maybe not normal or maybe not the way it used to be, but at a capacity where we can still be healthy, happy human beings. And that's 100%. Kind of the goal, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so many levels, right? Like they're the people that are terrified and really think we're irresponsible. And like you said, the judgment we get when we go to an event or have friends. But there's such a mental health component to COVID, like back to what you're talking about. And I've seen, you know, people die of a broken heart that are in nursing homes. And it's because now people are so scared to go visit their grandparent or their mom that they, you know, die alone in a nursing home. Yeah. And then kids who were going to school every day and had an outlet are now stuck inside. Maybe someone's bullying them because now they're like behind computers. And I just think there's so many levels to this. And so we can cater kind of to any of that. Like, of course, if you want to stay inside and wear a mask, like we are happy to offer you a test and we will mail one to you. And like, but do what's best for you. And then if you do need your company to go back to work, let's do it safely, and let's put in some protocols, and let's put in some guidelines. And if A happens, then we have B, C, D, E, which is so cool. What I learned in anesthesia. I love that part because, you know, when A goes wrong, we just move down the line. And then it's like, if you want to have a party, let's like try and make it a safe event as we can, like up to like your standards. Right. And so we are like no judgment zone. We just want people to like live the life they want to. Sure. And, you know, that's like the best part about this. And so it's really grown. So cool. I love it because everyone on our team, I'm very close with our CEO because I'm the director of operations. And so do all the corporate and event testing. And then as a PA, like it's been able to use my medical skill set. And then growing up kind of in an unstable home and like just knowing about mental health, it's helped me realize the other side of the coin with COVID. Sure. So that's a perfect segue to Heather and her personal life. So we're going to kind of backtrack a bit here. Heather and I have known each other for a couple years. I'm in the fitness community, you're in the wellness community. I've seen you at different events, but it was in December of 2019, so pre-COVID. I was invited to be a guest speaker. So you came with this guy and like, you know, we hadn't seen each other in forever. I'm like, what are you doing with your life? What's going on? And you just seemed like you were in a little bit of a searching moment. Like you had a job, you were doing well, you were a PA at the time, making good money, but it just seemed like you wanted more. And I recognize that because I've been at that stage in many places of my life. And you had just started this, you were involved in a CBD company as well. So you were kind of doing all of these things, but really what stood out to me is you're like, I'm not sure what's next. And I want to know what got you to the point where you said, I want more for my life. I am not happy or I'm not content with where I'm at anymore. Yeah, it's crazy. You're such a good people reader, which I've always loved about you.
I'm really intuitive, which is kind of scary, but I don't know. I feel like that helps me relate to people a little bit
It really
more.
is. And it's why people, I think, are drawn to you.
Yeah.
Because it's like, wise one.
Yeah.
Can you help me?
If only I could look in the mirror and say the same thing.
No. But it was beautiful because I remember listening to you speak at this event, and you just sounded so sure of being unsure of your path.
Yeah.
And to me, that's huge, because I think a lot of us have this in us where stability is amazing, and knowing how much money is coming in our account each week is amazing, and being successful, what is that to you? And when I really, really dug deep to find what does success mean, it's not the house, it's not the kids, it's not the car, it's not the money, and it's not the degree, because I had a lot of those things.
Yeah.
It was feeling purpose, and I didn't have that at my career. And that's hard, because I know a lot of my friends who still practice anesthesia, they love it. And when I was doing it, I absolutely loved it, and I know I was helping patients. But I really felt like I was in a box. So I had started questioning, what is this?
Yeah.
I think 6 months before I met you, I had just had some innovative ideas, and I've always been kind of all over the place, whether it's in fitness or decorating or any crazy idea. I'm I'm going to try this and see if it works.
See what works. Yeah.
But I never really was believing in myself, I guess. And, I met a neighbor, and he was like, wow, these are some great ideas. I've had history in the, tech industry. I'd love to help you get started. So we kind of 4 months early had formed a company, but it hadn't quite taken off yet. And in doing that, I'm kind of looking to other people who've kind of quit their, what we say is regular, job, or I don't know how to describe it, but a 9 to 5,
They're
right?
Constant. They're,
stability.
Sure.
And so that's why part of the reason I had wanted to go to an event like that was really just to hear people's stories, and how when the rug gets pulled, what do you do to survive?
Yeah.
But what you don't know is A, when it's going to come, and B, what it's going to feel like.
Right.
And all I know is if you have that feeling, you have to believe in yourself.
Sure.
And you have to believe that the universe is handing you something, and you have no other option than to make it work.
Right. But you've had a lot of practice with this.
Yes.
And this is key for some people that I talked a bit about this on a recent episode. Last year was the first for many people in dealing with depression, anxiety, social isolation, a lot of emotions that some of us have dealt with our entire lives. And I remember I was interviewed last year, and I was like, I'm so grateful that I've already had a lot of practice, because I feel for the people going through it right now as adults, because it's the first time they're dealing with it, which is terrifying. Yeah. And in speaking to you, I always, I like to hear a little bit of people's stories, just so I know kind of where they're coming from. You've had the rug pulled out from you since childhood, basically. Yeah. Born and raised in Atlanta. Tell us a little bit about your just growing up and who you were back then, because I think that will help explain why you are the way you are now.
Yeah, it's crazy, because I think all of us develop habits now that are from things we had happened to us from when we were 1 to 7, right? And that's not to say we can't change those, but sometimes they make us strong in who we are. So yeah, growing up was very unstable for me. Was raised by a single mom and the oldest of 4 kids, and she really had no financial support, so she was gone trying to just put food on the table for us. So growing up, even at 6, 7 years old, I'm left with kids.
Right.
And just figuring out how to feed them and just make sure, they were alive when my mom got home.
This is at 6 or 7 years old?
It's crazy, yeah.
Wow.
Even 8, yeah, I think... Yeah, through middle school. I mean, until we really my mom could afford like an au pair or some help or nannies.
Right.
You know, after school we would have like a neighbor watch us, but it really was when she was home, she was also depressed or sad. And I can understand why, but it made it where like a lot of times we were left alone.
Did you know your dad?
Yes, and he's local,
Okay.
and he's a completely different person now, which
Okay.
is kind of crazy.
And
But-
in a better way, hopefully? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's great. But,
Yeah.
you know, I don't think he knew a lot of what was going on. And I
Sure.
think, you know, like sometimes when you're in that survival mode or you are going through anxiety or depression, like my mom was, you have no idea, like, who's affected around you, right? You're like in this tunnel vision.
Yeah.
And you're just like trying to keep your head above water, never mind like those around you.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that's what was going on with her. And until she really picked herself back up, which ended up happening, I really was left for that like fight or flight. So I'm pretty terrible with, what's like the word? Affection.
Because you
And
never
I
had
think
it,
it's
right?
because, like
Yeah.
I never really had it.
Yeah.
And I'm very hard to please. I think I have very high expectations of people. And so that might make me a little difficult. And that's probably why I'm extreme. I'm like, it's either like you do it right or you don't do it.
Sure.
And it's probably why, like, where that came from.
Do you think that's where your hustle comes from? Is that you basically were left to raise your 3 siblings?
Yeah, I think for sure.
You know?
Yeah, and it's like they were very close in age. I was like 3 years older than the next closest, and then
Okay.
they were all like 15 to 17 months
Oh,
apart.
wow.
So they were like super close, and then I was always looked at like the mom. I mean, you know, like I would sit on them, like stay here, like don't move. And then, you know, next thing I know, my brothers are bigger than me, and I'm like, what's happening? But yeah, it was just like a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
And I love that my mom was able to turn her life around. She got a stable career. She found a husband that supported her and loved her, and like all the things that were like maybe missing back when she had us. And then, you know, that depression creeped back. And that made me realize, like, you know, the drive that a lot of us have in us, if we're not utilizing it to its
Yeah.
full potential,
Yeah.
like we can fall back in these habits.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I always say happiness is not a choice. If it were a choice, like the world would be happy. We could all just choose it. But
Yeah.
happiness it's just about creating habits and a series of habits. And I always say depression is such a selfish thing. And I know that sounds really harsh, but when you are extremely depressed, all you think about is yourself and how bad your life is and poor me, poor me. So I'm sure your mom was thinking all of that. Like her husband left her. She's got 4 kids. Like she wasn't thinking about how hard that was going to be for you and how much pressure that was going to put on you growing up and how it was going to affect you because she could only think about herself.
Yeah.
But it sounds like looking back, you're able to kind of compartmentalize and realize that, you know, she was this way because of this reason. And you say that like you're kind of a heart, like you do it the right way or the wrong way, but I feel like you have a lot more compassion than you
Yeah,
give.
I
And
try to.
and the affection, I feel like now that you have 2 kids, and granted this is coming from like Instagram or whatever, but I feel like I can read people pretty well. I feel like you've taken what she's done and kind of gone the opposite way without blaming her for some of the events that have happened in your life. And when we spoke before, you said that you recognized when you were working as an anesthesiologist and going through, or not as an anesthesiologist, but working in that
Yep.
capacity, it was just go, 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 work, 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 work. And you saw yourself, you recognized going down this route of depression.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like, you know, when you're younger, and I especially felt this like at 20 because
Yeah.
my mom had gone through so much and was stable and like literally could do anything she wants now. And she wasn't, you know, happy. But at 20, I was like, okay, you know, I want all these things that she has. I want a stable husband. I want to make my own money. I want 2 kids. I want a nice house. And then all of a sudden you get all that. And then you're like, wait, is this happiness?
Yeah.
And I think luckily she went through that cycle again for me. And if anything, I thank her, and because, it came at her expense, unfortunately. Sure. But I recognized how important it is for us that feel that drive, that feel that higher purpose to act on it.
Yeah.
And I think the hardest part has been for my husband and my kids, because I'm not a traditional mom, and I do love them so much. And, but I don't know if I should even say this, but they're not my world, right? I'm part of their world and they're part of mine. And, I would do anything for them.
Yeah.
But I want to see them succeed.
I love that.
I want to see them do well. And I can't do that if I'm everything to them.
I love that. No, I think it puts so much pressure on women and mothers, especially. And granted, I don't have kids, so this is just looking from the outside. But I think when we are the be all and the end all for our kids and vice versa, then that's all you have. So God forbid they leave for college, then what? Who are you then? Yeah. Or they choose to do something differently than what you wanted them to, or vice versa. A parent dies and a kid is 12 years old. We have to teach them that there's more to life than one person or the car or the whatever. All of these things fit together, and you can be a complete human being without one specific thing. Yes. Is that traumatic? Would that be detrimental for a time? Sure. But we're all going to go through something. We're all going to go through grief and pain. It's going to happen. And we want to protect our kids so much that we don't let it happen when they're kids. So when they turn 20 and they get, or 18, and they're denied to their, the top college of their choice, then they're distraught and they're so sad and upset. And it's that's not the be all and the end all. So I actually give you props for saying that. Because I think it's so true. You're a piece of them.
When you have a lot of wisdom with it, because a lot of people that, you can't wait to have kids. You can't wait to do all these things, right? All of us, and most of us, right?
Yeah.
And even if we don't have kids, we can't wait to be the best aunt.
Right.
But it's kind of or get married. And then it's but I always say I don't need my husband and he doesn't need me. But we just have chosen to do this together.
We want each other.
Yes. And I don't make him better. He doesn't make me better, but we support each other to live the best life that we have. And maybe it's super selfish, right? But we have to be. Yeah. And maybe it's partly a defense mechanism or something on my part, but I really think it allows you to be your best self, because you're not putting it on anybody else.
Right.
If I fail, that's on me.
Yeah.
Not on my kids, not on him.
Yeah.
And so I think that makes you better.
Yeah.
I be.
Well, you have to be. I actually talked to Gretchen in the very first episode of the season about this. It's you have to be complete on your own. It's a morbid thought, but we come into this world alone, and we're going to go out alone. Yeah. And all of the people and the pieces of the puzzle, they all fit together. But at the end of the day, it is your head that lays down on that pillow, and you have to be content with yourself. And it might not be every day is happy, 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 but there has to be joy in yourself, in your own life. And everything is just an added bonus. The kids, the money, the house, that's all just a bonus. You look at people like Mother Teresa and all these people that had literally nothing, and they're some of the happiest people in the world because they're content with who they are.
Yeah. And
they're content in their purpose of giving. And I see that in your job now, in your career, and what it's turning into. And it feels like, COVID was almost a blessing for you because you didn't know where you were going to go. You knew that you wanted something different, and you trusted that your purpose was bigger than, what you were doing. And you kind of took a leap of faith, and that's really hard to do. But I would encourage anyone that is unhappy with where they're at to just start making really small steps.
Baby steps.
Even when you don't know what you want to do or where you want to go. I think that's a huge, looking back for me, and maybe you can shed some light on this too. When I was 23, 24, I went through episodes where I was very, very depressed and then okay, and then was re-diagnosed with bipolar. So it was very up and down. And I remember at one of my lowest points of life, like, people saying, you know, you just have to figure out what you want. It's like, I didn't even know what I wanted. I didn't even know what I wanted. I didn't know that I wanted to be this or I wanted to do that. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to be able to go home at night and not cry alone or binge eat and get rid of, like, I knew what I didn't want. So I started making tiny steps to just make things better. And it's so important to not put a focus on who you want to be, rather what you want to do and how you want to feel.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel that way?
Yes, because it really is like, it feels like a dramatic shift, right? Do you listen to, I'm sure you listen to How I Built This.
Yes. Yeah.
I love it because he doesn't highlight why they got famous, right? Or like that's part of the story, but it's actually what you're doing, which is talking about these baby steps.
Right.
And it goes back to like, my kids aren't my life, my husband's not my life. It's because I need like hundreds of people around me to be successful, because every single one of those people brings new light to me or teaches me something or teaches me patience or courage, or even if they weren't the nicest person, they taught me something. Right. And so that kind of helps people. Like I always tell people, networking, which is exactly what you're amazing at. And you know, preach is like one of the most important things you could do. Right. Being kind and open and just like listening to other people's ideas and what they have to say is huge. You know, we don't have to be the pioneer. It's actually the hardest to be the first to do things. You know, even our company has gotten scrutiny because of the way we do things. Sure. And you just have to know, like, that's part of it, you know, if you're the first. And so sometimes it's better to kind of like, oh, I really do like that idea, but like, I'm going to have a cool spin on it. Yeah. And so that's like an even better way. But like, first research that, you know, initial idea. Make sure that fit is right for you. And then saving cash outside of your day-to-day job. So I know you touched a little bit that I sold CBD, and that was a great way for me to meet a ton of people. You know, it was a company I trusted. It was physicians I worked with at the hospital. And so I would stash that cash away to pay for the startup that actually went completely belly up. So thank God I did that because I would have like drained my savings beforehand. Right. But luckily I was kind of at even when the pandemic happened. Yeah. And so I hadn't put all my eggs in one basket, you know? Right. And then always just talking to people. Yeah. I think, you know, like what you do and what you're good at.
I love it.
So I think that's super important.
Yeah. Okay. This is like, I think this is one of my favorite interviews so far. Just because it's so different, but still the root of it is still health and wellness. So 2 quick questions to kind of wrap it up. What has been the biggest challenge about last year and having this success? What's come along with that?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge has been, I want to say it's not questioning myself when everybody else has. So when you do something different and you start to kind of dip your toes even like a little bit with the baby steps, you're always going to have people who think you're like gone off the deep end. And I think especially when this happened, it was even close family members and friends I'd worked with that are like, what are you doing? Yeah. And like COVID's not a real thing. It's not going to last long. Right. It's like August and you're just now starting, like good luck. And, but believing in yourself. So like, yeah, the biggest challenge was just like, even when it was my husband telling me like, this is crazy, me knowing like in my heart, like, well, even if it is, like, I'm going to make it work.
Right. And still having, I would assume he might challenge your choices, but still supporting you when you want to make those choices. For the most part.
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah. And even if he doesn't, I have to just say like, well, this is my decision. Sure. You know, without like a, you know, like an end all, right? Like I don't want to like say it's like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're thinking of.
Ultimatum.
Thank you. Yeah.
But like, hey, like, please, like, believe in me too.
And now is he like, Okay, you proved me
Yeah.
wrong.
I can think a little bit, yeah. And he's so good. I mean, we have those days where we're like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
But it's been, I just know, like, once you make that jump and you see yourself in action, I think it gets easier.
Yeah.
Right.
That's kind of how I was when I was like,
Yeah.
I'm going to start a podcast, and I'm going to, like, it's been this way my whole life. Like, when I told my parents I was going to literally just drive across the country and go to LA, they were like, I'm sorry, what? Like, I don't know. I'll figure it out. I always figure it out. But you have to have that confidence. You have to have that faith, and you have to take the first step. And then you look back and you're like, oh, I figured that out. And then something bigger happens and you overcome that, and something bigger happens. So it's just all these little things that kind of pile on, and you look back and sometimes you say, oh, I fucked that up. That was probably a mistake, but that's okay. But most of the time you look back and you say, that built my confidence, or built my bank account, or built whatever to take the next step. And you have to kind of do that. I remember when I told everyone I was going to, like, do this and put it on YouTube, and they're like, well, why? And I'm like, because I legit want my own show. I legit want to travel. I legit want to bring this to the world, and, like, what we can offer in this conversation. And I know a year from now, people are going to be like, holy shit, you were right.
Yeah.
But it's taking that first step. And
when it's not, I think too, like, if you get some momentum
Yes.
and it slows down,
Yes.
don't panic.
Yeah.
Like, that's when everybody quits too, right? Because
Right.
you'll get the idea, you'll start moving, things are going great, and then all of a sudden it's like it slows down, and then you're like, wait a second.
Yeah. But you're like, that's the calm before the storm.
That's
just wait for it.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I tell people,
Yeah.
like, just push through that
Yeah.
part, or, like, pivot, but not too dramatically,
Right.
right? Like something in that field, but, like, that will align with your vision and your big goals.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, just that it's like a J curve, right? And so,
Yes.
like, when you're at the bottom of the J and it slows down, you're like, am I gonna make it
Yeah.
back up? And
Yeah.
you will.
Or
So-
COVID comes along and gives you a different
It
purpose,
just
right?
puts you on another letter.
kind of was a blessing in disguise for you. So last question, what are your goals for 2021?
I love this question. I really want to see people get back to work.
Okay.
In office.
Yeah.
I think it's super
Yes.
important. I think working from home and flexibility is, like, amazing. So
Sure.
I want to keep that. But
Yeah.
like, I think there is something about people being together again and in a shared space. And so I really want to provide testings affordably for companies like that, so
Yeah.
that the employees feel safe, the employer feels safe, and that, we can get back to just, like, being together again.
I love that. I
So
love
that's my big goal for
Yeah.
this year. Yeah, I'm just so excited. I, like,
Awesome.
loved this. Thank you so
You're
much.
so welcome. Well, thank you for being a guest. And where can we find you? What's your handle?
On Instagram, I'm at Heath, like Heather, _N_wellness. So, like, Heath in Wellness.
Okay.
And then our website is w4humanity.com, and you can read about our mission, and we try to put out cool YouTube videos. So,
You do. You do.
Well, I'm not trying to, but people on my team are, and they're really good at it.
Listen, you can't be good at everything, Heather.
But we'd love to have you on.
I would love to be
That would be
on.
awesome.
Absolutely. Well, this was so much fun. Thank you for being a guest, and just thank you for being an inspiring person in the community. So I really look
so
up to you.
much.
You're
And
welcome.
You too.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the 6 Feet Above podcast. I'm your host, Megan Armstrong. Subscribe so you never miss another episode, as a new episode is released every Tuesday. And if you're enjoying the series, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. Follow the show on Instagram at 6 Feet Above Podcast to keep the conversation going, and feel free to reach out to me directly at Megstagram11. This episode is a product of Audiographies, produced by Megan Armstrong and Denor Sepolia, edited by Jacob Smolian, and the music is by Keenan Willis. Funded by yours truly. I'll see you next time.